Today's video is called the self-help cyclone. Sounds kind of weird, right? Self-help is great. I'm a big fan of self-help. It is definitely something that helped pull me out of the pit of despair, but it really is a double-edged sword. I have to warn you. You may have already experienced this yourself, so you may just be nodding your head yes. You may be just getting into it, and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And don't get me wrong, there's a ton of value in self-help, but there are some issues that I want to go over. One is most self-help is not really readily available. What do I mean by that? Any of the big names that you can name off right now, they are not only through the finish line, but they're 10 miles past the finish line. And for a lot of people that self-help appeals to, they may be just beginning, or even just thinking about beginning, or even thinking about making some improvements to their life, okay? So we're talking about baby steps. And a lot of self-help gurus tell some platitudes, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but even well-meaning stuff, but they're telling you kind of the high-level generic steps that work, and not all the like crawling on glass and all the failures and repeated failures that you have to go through to make any sort of progress. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg, right, as they call it. So when an iceberg is in the water, only 10% of it is actually showing the very top, and 90% is underwater. You don't really see how big the iceberg is. That's the problem with some established self-help gurus. You see the end result and they can tell you the generic steps that got there, but you're not really living every sleepless night, every moment of anxiety, every major frustration and setback. So not being accessible is a problem with some of the top self-guru people I saw, in my opinion. Another part is false hope it could provide. There's nothing worse than false hope. So in Man's Search for Meaning, the gentleman was in the Auschwitz internment camps, and he always knew who was going to die next. They're like, oh, we're definitely going to get out of the concentration camps by Christmas. We're definitely going to get out by December, just to keep themselves hopeful, not necessarily realistic. And you get all these big, bold, exciting promises. And then Christmas comes, December comes, and you do some of the things that self-help gurus tell you to do, and you don't get the result you want. And if you've set yourself up with false hope, it can devastate you. So that is another problem to be careful with, false hope. Hyping yourself up, getting hyped up, whether a self-help guru is hyping you up or you're doing it internally, which is certainly going to be part of it. The last thing I want to mention in this video, to keep it short, for the self-help cyclone, is you can get into a negative feedback loop. And what does that mean? So you do something, it triggers something bad, and that circles around and triggers something bad, and it triggers something bad, and it keeps happening and keeps happening. If I didn't say that cleanly, I'll give a little bit more detail. So self-help definitely can turn into a bit of an addiction. I know it did for me. There are parts of it that were really good and were useful, but I started to watch more and more podcasts, videos, self-help resources and guides, because I would get a little payoff in my brain. Everyone's different, but there is a theory that if you're making plans and you want to do something, some folks say that you shouldn't tell anybody. You should keep it private to yourself, because when you start announcing it to the world, your brain releases the reward chemicals and you get a little bit of payoff. And it's just enough for some people where you won't follow through, maybe with those next crucial steps. Same kind of thing with self-help. I would listen, I would hear these great successes and these exciting stories. Your brain doesn't know the difference between what it's thinking is happening and what's actually happening, okay? So when you see these victories and you get excited and you get the payoff, or you hear this great nugget of wisdom, sometimes that can release reward chemicals. And you're like, well, shit, I've got my reward chemicals, and you're good for an hour or a day or maybe longer. But just like any addiction, you probably need more and more to keep going. And I personally, my own personal story is I would walk around. I love going on long walks in beautiful parks, putting in my earbuds, several different awesome podcasts, which again, I still love aspects of them. I still listen to some of them, but they go and tell you their formula for success and how they got there, rags to riches, all that stuff. And you're listening and you get excited, and then it's over. And I eventually got to the point where sometimes I'd listen to 2 or 3 full podcasts in a day. Some of these bad boys are 1.5 to maybe 3 hours long. Now, granted, I might listen on a faster speed, but still, this was taking a significant amount of time. I was just listening to podcast after podcast, getting reward and reward. Also, you'd hear a good podcast sometimes, it would say something like it was speaking directly to you, and you're like, oh my God, yeah, that is definitely my problem. You feel like you got a little nugget of wisdom, and I'm not saying you didn't, but then I would start feeling like, oh, well, that next podcast, that next one is going to have another nugget of wisdom in it, and I'd want to hear the next one and the next one. With the negative feedback loop, you'll listen to this, you may get some good advice, but you also get payoff that you did something good when you didn't necessarily do it, and you'll chase that feeling. It's a good feeling, and then you won't do anything because of that. So that's the negative feedback loop, and then you'll go to listen to more of these podcasts to get that fix and to get inspiration. But again, external motivation that comes from outside, is generally not that great and is not sustainable. You have to have a way to have internal, inside motivation. Still something that I drastically have trouble with, but just sharing. I'm a broken person that's trying to get better. So those are just 3 reasons why self-help can be a cyclone or a negative feedback loop. I still love the genre. I still think there's genuine folks, but be wary of these pitfalls. These very easy to fall into traps. So just to reiterate, when you're starting off and you're thinking about getting better, some of it's not accessible. These people have crossed the finish line. They've built companies and whole organizations, and it's really hard to follow those breadcrumbs. It's really hard to see the beginning stages that were brutal and tough. Number 2 is the false hope that it can provide. You got to stay in reality, and these folks can pump you up past beyond what you're capable and what you're actually honestly probably at the moment willing to do. And if you make false hope and you don't reach it, it can set you back further than maybe you were when you started. And last but not least is that negative feedback loop, almost an addiction-like quality of getting the payoff for listening to great stories and great successes with self-help, needing to sustain that with more videos, more podcasts, more whatever you consume when it comes to self-help. You can end up doing absolutely nothing but listening to this stuff. It's not crap. It's not negative necessarily, but you gotta really be aware of these things. Definitely, they personally affected me some. Again, that was the self-help cyclone. If this resonated with you, let me know. Tell me if you've experienced any of this in the comments. If you didn't know any of these 3 things, maybe I pointed that out to you. That would be really cool. Let me know that in the comments as well. If you'd like to talk about this or any other subjects relating to making your brain work better and maybe making a better life for yourself, please feel free to join Sovereignty League. We're trying to build a community there, not led by any one person, but I'm making a resource that I wish that I had a couple years ago when I at least started this trek. I'm still on the trek, so I would love to have like-minded people, discussion, prop each other up. We're all at different levels. It's a place to belong, a place where you can share and maybe grow. If that sounds of interest to you, it'd be great to see you there. All right, thanks everybody.